Hello, good evening, everyone. Uh, our host today, SP Vijayawada, is facing some technical issues from their side. They're trying to figure it out. I hope this is okay. We'll wait for another 5 minutes. Thank you.
Hello. Can you hear me? I am unable to hear anything.
Yes, sir, you're audible. We are facing some technical issues. SPA Vijayawada is trying to solve this. We'll start in the next 2 minutes, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Good evening, all. Hello.
Hello, sir. You're audible now.
Yes, thank you, Irene. So there is still some issue we are trying to resolve with the video, but we thought that in the meanwhile we can start, so that we don't want to keep all our dignitaries waiting. So I'll request my comparing team. They were also quite prepared. So we'll start with they'll start with the program now. And in the meanwhile, we have a group of students who have assembled also who are eagerly waiting to join. So we'll be joining and then starting. Okay. So Irene, I'll now request my comparing team to take over the program and start with the program without any further delay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. A very good evening to dignitaries, faculty, students, the representatives from various local self-governments, professionals in the field of development planning, and everyone attending today's session. Welcome to the 13th session of Kerala Urban Dialogue presented by the School of Planning and Architecture, Vijayawada, in collaboration with Kerala Institute of Local Administration. I am Siri Vaidadi, first-year student of Masters in Urban and Regional Planning in School of Planning and Architecture, Vijayawada. And I am Muskan Varshne, first-year student from Environment Planning and Management in School of Planning and Architecture, Vijayawada. The School of Planning and Architecture, Vijayawada, also known as SPAV, is an institute of national importance established in 2008 under the Ministry of Human Resource Development, currently under the Ministry of Education. SPAV offers 2 courses in undergraduation and 9 courses in post-graduation. And our alumni are currently serving as professionals in diverse fields across the country as well as the global field. Coming to the session, this is the 13th session of the Kerala Urban Dialogue series. Today, we discuss about the theme Planning for Equity and Inclusion for Urban Justice. The session Planning for Equity and Inclusion for Urban Justice focuses on integrating fairness and inclusivity into urban planning to ensure that all residents, especially marginalized communities, have equal access to resources and opportunities. Despite Kerala's progressiveness, urbanization might lead to disparities and social exclusion. This session aims to identify barriers to equity in urban Kerala and propose strategies for inclusive development. By examining case studies and using planning tools, the dialogue seeks to foster informed action towards creating equitable urban spaces. The goal is to embed principles of spatial justice into urban planning, promoting resilient and inclusive communities. The Kerala Urban Dialogue initiative will serve as a platform for collaboration to advance these objectives and build more equitable urban environments in Kerala. To begin with the discussion, we have with us Ms. Irene Antony, ma'am, a fellowship student at Kerala Institute of Local Administrations, student of the Center of Environment Planning and Technology, CEPT, presenting the welcome address. We welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you. Good evening. Very distinguished guests, speakers, and participants. On behalf of the Kerala Institute of Local Administration, it is my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to each one of you to the 13th session of the Kerala Urban Dialogues. Today, we gather to explore an essential and very timely theme, that is planning for equity and inclusion for urban justice. This session has been thoughtfully hosted by the School of Planning and Architecture, Vijayawada, and we see this as a testament to our collective commitment to addressing the critical issues that shape the future of our urban landscapes. As we navigate the complexities of urbanization, it is imperative that we place equity and inclusion at the heart of our planning processes to ensure that our cities are not only sustainable, but also just and inclusive for all. We are very honored to have with us a distinguished panel of experts who have made significant contributions to the field of urban planning and development. Their insights will undoubtedly enrich our understanding of how we can move towards a more equitable and just urban future. Our keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Sandeep Agarwal, Director of the Alberta Land Institute, brings with him a wealth of knowledge and experience in land use and policy, which is going to set the stage for our discussion for today. We are also very privileged to have Dr. Professor Ramesh Srikonta, Director of SPA Vijayawada, who will be delivering the inaugural address. The panel discussions that follow, featuring Dr. Barsha Paricha, Professor Shashwat Bandyopadhyay, Dr. Binoy Peter, and Dr. Komali Maneni, promises to delve into the multifaceted challenges and opportunities that lie ahead as we strive to make our cities more equitable and inclusive. Before I conclude my words, on behalf of KILA, I would like to express my gratitude to our host, SPA Vijayawada, and to all of you for your continued participation and engagement in the dialogue series. Your contributions are very vital as we work together to forge a path towards urban justice in Kerala. Once again, welcome to the Kerala Urban Dialogues, and I wish you all a very fruitful and inspiring session. Thank you.
Now we would like to invite Dr. Adi Narayan sir to express his views on the topic of discussion. Dr. Adi Narayan sir, Associate Professor Planning, acquired PhD degree in Urban Studies and Planning from School of Planning and Architecture, Anna University, Chennai. He holds PhD in Simulation and Modeling of Energy Efficient Sustainable Development of Metropolitan City for Quantitative Urban Analysis through System Dynamics. He has experience of more than 30 years in the academic research and professional field of planning. He has authored over 30 peer-reviewed journal research papers, ISBN, ISSN, and international conference presentations. As a part of the MOU between SPAV and KILA, Dr. Adi Narayan is the nodal officer who is spearheading the initiative under the MOU. We welcome you, sir, to express your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Sri. Good evening to one and all. Distinguished guests and today's eminent speakers, and especially our keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Sandeep Agarwal from University of Alberta, Canada, and Dr. Barsha Paricha, Q, India, and Professor Shashwat Bandyopadhyay, Professor CEPT University, and Dr. Binoy Peter, Center for Migration and Inclusive Development, Kerala, and Dr. Komali Kantamaneni, University of Central Lancashire, and Sri Nijamuddin, IAS, Director General, KILA. Esteemed colleagues and participants from various local self-government, and our alumni, Mr. Ashwin Chandran, who will be presenting his work, and my dear students, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the Kerala Urban Dialogue, a vital platform for exchanging ideas, fostering collaboration as we discuss a topic that lies at the very heart of sustainable urban development. Planning for equity and inclusion for urban justice. To give the context of this Kerala urban dialogue, SPA Vijayawada had entered into an MOU with KILA, Kerala Institute of Local Administration, Government of Kerala, supported by Nodal Agency, Autonomous Institution for Training, Research and Consultancy. We are happy to associate with KILA. As a part of MOU, SPA Vijayawada, in collaboration with KILA, is organizing this Kerala urban dialogue, the 13th dialogue in this KUD series. As we gather here today, we do so with shared commitment to ensuring that our cities are not just spaces for economic growth and technological advancement, but also of social equity, inclusiveness, and justice. Urban development must go beyond physical and social infrastructure. It must weave together a diverse fabric of society to create cities where every individual, regardless of their background, has access to opportunities, services, and a decent quality of life. Kerala, with its unique socio-cultural dynamics and geographical diversity, presents both challenges and opportunities in the realm of urban planning. Kerala state is celebrated for its high human development indicators, literacy rates, and social welfare systems. However, like all rapidly urbanizing regions, Kerala's cities are grappling with issues that threaten to undermine these achievements. These include rising inequalities, marginalization of vulnerable population, gentrification in urban centers, and uneven distribution of resources and as well as opportunities. This is further worsened by externalities like climate change. Today, as we engage in this dialogue, our goal is to identify key barriers to equity and inclusion that exist in Kerala's urban areas, especially in urban system. These barriers could be economic, social, or spatial, but they all share one thing in common. They inhibit the ability of our cities to be just and fair for all residents. Whether it is the urban poor who struggle for access to basic services, women and children who face safety concerns, or marginalized communities who are left out of the planning process. These issues must be brought to the forefront. In closing, I would like to express my sincere hope that through today's discussion in this 13th Kerala Urban Dialogue will be both insightful and action-oriented. Let us use this platform to share our knowledge, challenges, our assumptions, and collaboratively develop strategies that will help us build cities that reflect the best of Kerala values, fairness, inclusion, and social justice. I am confident that today's evening panel of experts joining us online will be able to help throw light on these matters and support in framing these ideas towards planning for equity and inclusion for urban justice. Thank you once again, and I look forward to a productive and inspiring dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you for your valuable words, sir. Now I would like to call upon Dr. Ramesh Srikonda, sir. Ramesh Srikonda, sir, is a distinguished architect planner with extensive experience in architecture and urban planning. Currently, he is serving as the director of School of Planning and Architecture, Vijayawada, and a professor of architecture here. He earned his B.Arch from JNTU, Hyderabad, and an M.Arch in Town and Country Planning from Anna University, followed by a PhD in Energy Conservation in Buildings from IIT Delhi, joining the Central Architectural Services in 1985. He has held key roles including Chief Architect and Director of Planning. His notable achievements include finalist positions in the World Habitat Awards and winning an urban planning competition for Jaipur. He has contributed to academic conferences, served as a journal referee, and developed a successful M.Arch program focused on sustainability and energy efficiency. His technical paper titled Energy Efficient Strategies for Technical Buildings in AIR Technical Review had been adjudged as one of the best technical papers for Akashvani Technical Excellency Awards. He is also one of the 8 top high-powered committee members for development of infrastructure for capital region of Amravati, constituted by the government of Andhra Pradesh. Professor Dr. Ramesh is the chairperson for this session of Kerala Urban Dialogue. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Distinguished guests, eminent speakers and panelists for today's discussion. Professor Dr. Sandeep Agarwal, University of Alberta, Canada. Dr. Barsha Puracha, Cure India. Professor Saswat Bandyopadhyaya, SEPT University. Dr. Binoy Peter, Center for Migration and Inclusive Development, Kerala. And Dr. Komali Kantamaneni, University of Central London, UK. Shri Nizamuddin, IAS, Director General, Kila. Esteemed colleagues, participants from the various local self-governments in Kerala, and my dear students and future planners. Good evening to one and all. It is a privilege to welcome you all to this 13th Kerala Urban Dialogue on Planning for Equity and Inclusion for Urban Justice. Today's dialogue is not just timely but essential as Kerala cities rapidly evolve amidst both opportunities and challenges. As we all know, the state of Kerala is recognized for its social achievements. Yet we need to keep in mind that urbanization is bringing new inequalities that threatens to undermine these gains. Urban justice demands that we address these disparities head-on, ensuring that our cities become spaces where every resident has an equal stake in their future. Inclusive urban planning is our most powerful tool in this regard. It's not merely about designing the buildings or infrastructure. It's about shaping cities where all voices are heard, where public services reach everyone, and where opportunities are accessible to all, regardless of a socio-economic background, gender, and ability. Today, in the next 1 hour, as we delve into these critical themes, let us focus on translating our discussions into applicable policies. Based on my experience working in the Indian government at a national and a state level, I can clearly state that this Kerala urban policy, which the government of Kerala has undertaken, is a remarkable step that can provide that Kerala government with unique opportunities to institutionalize equity and inclusion, ensuring that these principles guide the future patterns of urban development in Kerala. This can become an exemplary example for other states to follow in India. The urban challenges poses is clear to that to make our cities truly livable and just for all. I urge each of you to think boldly, challenge the status quo, and commit to the vision of an equitable urban Kerala. Our institution, that is School of Planning and Architecture, Vijayawada, one of the Indian premier institutes in the field of architecture, urban planning and design, has also been actively involved in research and the study initiatives that address with critical issues of inclusive planning. These initiatives we reflect in institutions' commitment for fostering urban environment that are equitable, accessible, and inclusive for all members of the society. Key areas of research, especially few items I just would like to mention, that is, one, urban poverty and slum redevelopment, wherein we have explored strategies for integrating informal settlements into the urban fabric in ways that are both equitable and sustainable. The gender inclusive urban design, through which the SPAV has focused on making urban spaces more inclusive for women, including studies on how these designs of public spaces can enhance safety, accessibility, and usability for women and the girls. Inclusive transportation system, that is one of the important area. Other than that, we have several items which we can able to put it, that community participation in planning, inclusive housing policies, building inclusive societies, equitable access for urban services and critical infrastructure, study like links with the smart cities and inclusivity, sustainable urban development. These studies, which explores the intersection of the social equity and environmental sustainability and economic development in urban areas. Inclusive public spaces, and specifically if you focus it on the design and development of the public spaces for all sections and age groups of the society. SPA Vijayawada has also focused on educating and building the capacity of future planners, architects, and designers in the principles of equitable and inclusive planning through our curriculum in both our UG and PG programs in architecture and planning. These completed ongoing research study initiatives by SPA Vijayawada reflects our commitment to promoting inclusive planning practices that addresses the diverse needs of the urban population. These efforts, SPA continues to contribute to the creation of urban environments that are just, equitable, and inclusive for all. Likewise, I urge all the institutions, academic, professional, and government line departments to come forward and take up initiatives that incorporate the essence of equity and inclusiveness. Thank you. I look forward to the meaningful exchange and outcomes that will emerge from today's dialogue. Let us now move forward with our discussion. Thank you. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful thoughts on the topic. Now, I would like to introduce you all to the keynote speaker for today's session, Professor Dr. Sandeep Agarwal, sir. With over 25 years of experience in academia, he is a professor and associate dean in the Faculty of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies at the University of Alberta. He is also the director of the Alberta Land Institute, a multidisciplinary research center that focuses on land use and environment policy issues. A PhD from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and he has taught courses and researched on urban planning, human rights, municipal governance, and sustainable development at the University of Alberta since 2013. He has led 200 plus publications in his contribution to planning education, including founding the School of Urban and Regional Planning, garnered him a national award. He has also obtained certifications in educational leadership and adjudication and regulation. His core competencies include higher education teaching, academia, research, educational leadership, curriculum development, program evaluations, stakeholder engagement, and policy analysis. We welcome you, sir, to express your views on today's topic of discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sherry. Can you hear me okay? Can someone do a thumbs up?
Yes.
Irene, I can see it. Oh, excellent. Thank you. Thank you so very much for all of you to be joining in today. Let me just share my screen, then start off with the presentation. So I'm going to do a share here. So Irene, do you see my slide? Not the notes, just the slides.
Yes, sir, your slides are visible.
Excellent. Okay. So yeah, once again, thank you all, and thank you all for joining. For you, it's evening. For me, it's early morning. But I'm very, very happy to be here. And a special thank you to Professor Adi Narayan for inviting me to this Kerala Urban Dialogues Forum. I did hear about it once I was at actually just last year at NIT Calicut. So I know that this forum is doing a lot of good work, at least making everyone aware of different challenges and opportunities that Indian cities present. So what I have in front of you is the title of my presentation, Equity in the City, which is what I was asked to talk about, and lessons from Canada. I just wanted to say that I've been working in this field for about 12 years, and it has led to some significant changes in Canada in terms of legislative changes, policy changes, as well as changes to the city bylaws in the City of Toronto, as well as in the City of Edmonton, where I live now. I will start off my presentation by grounding my my work in talking about some fundamental theories and definitions before I get into my work in Canada, and then leave you with some thoughts on Indian cities, and that could be discussed by the panelists that will follow me. So let me go ahead and begin to unpack a few ideas. So just I'm gonna again look at Irene if she sees the next slide. All
Yes.
good?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so I wanted to talk a few theories that are out there, and for students who are in the audience, and it should be important for you to understand when we talk about equity and human rights and things of that in nature in the city, where they actually have emerged from. So so there are two concepts, right to the city and then rights in the city. And rights in the city is the one that I have sort of developed in last few years. So in terms of right to the city, it is a concept that was developed by Lafave, Henry Lafave, and it basically the discourse around urban policies and right-based discourse was surfaced in the 60s, which was part of a wider social protest against capitalism. And it was more around urban crises that Paris was facing at that point of time. So Henry Lafave had written a book in 1968 called Right to the City. And then he wrote another book, The Production of Space, in 1992. And both together led to the idea of for right to the city. Now, basically, the two texts, what they talk about is the need for the participation of all urban residents, dwellers in urban planning. That is the key message that Lafave puts out. And so basically, he talks about two principal ideas. They're kind of interrelated. And first one is the city is an oeuvre, and oeuvre means a collection of work. It's a sort of French word, in which all its citizens participate and make decisions that contribute to the production of urban spaces within a city, right? So that's the key concept. And the second one is the spaces are produced by their inhabitants, and you see it much more actually in Indian cities. And they do that by physically appropriating these spaces, by accessing them, occupying them, and using them in our everyday life. So again, the important thing about right to the city is that it resists the power of capital and the state by calling city inhabitants to engage in direct struggle for urban politics as a means to achieve access and occupancy. Now, the problem with Lafave's idea is that we do not know what he means by right. Whose right he's talking about? How will this be implemented? So some of these challenges have come up in the recent past. So rights in the city is what I begin to talk about, which is essentially a bundle of legally binding human rights, indigenous rights, and other rights and freedoms that apply to city dwellers who sort of live in a city, and these are the rights that are enveloped within the rights in a city. So when I talk about human rights, we're talking about individual rights of people living in a city, and they have these rights, and they have these inherent rights because of being a human being. Being a human being means it comes with dignity, it comes with the respect that each individual needs, and just the fact that every human being is equal. So that is the thrust behind human right. Indigenous rights are collective rights and that are intended to protect the rights of indigenous peoples who have been living and sort of in the Canadian context, actually the land belongs to them, that was then taken over by colonial settlers, 300 and 400 years ago. So these rights are the ones that contribute to indigenous people's survival. So when you think about India, we're talking about Adivasis, we're talking about tribal people. So keep that in mind. And other rights and freedoms are the ones that are not necessarily included in human or indigenous rights, such as the right to housing. It's not included everywhere. Legally, I'm talking about right to work, for instance. And there are other forms of freedoms that may not be absolutely guaranteed, but they are important for each one of us. So some international examples of where right to the city and the rights in the city are being brought in together at the city level. Here are a few examples. One is Montreal charters. So Montreal, this is in Canada, and the city charter of the city of Montreal in 2002, and the Montreal Charter of Rights and Responsibility of 2006 are key. The Charter of the City of Montreal, the 2002 one, essentially recognizes city as a legal person with rights and obligations and charges for its community and neighborhood municipalities. And the charter, what it did was it led to the creation of the Office de Consultatio Publique de Montréal, basically the Office of Public Consultation, which facilitates Montrealers to participate in urban planning and development related matters. So essentially, it brings people together around an issue, and it is led by the local government, that is the City of Montreal. And the 2006 Montreal Charter basically created the Ombudsman's Office, which is meant to resolve the conflicts and concerns raised by citizens who believe that something has been wronged to them, that their rights have been violated, and then Ombudsman Office then investigate those complaints and try to mediate between the city and the public where such situations arise. Mexico's city charter recognizes the residents' rights and responsibilities to participate in city building processes. The Victoria Charter in Australia makes sure that state and local governments make new laws which are fair, that improve public services, and make decisions that are fairly balanced, that can balance different competing public interests. And the fourth one that I just want to highlight is the Dakar, Senegal one, and it's called Citizens Pact. And basically what it does, it sets out the reciprocal responsibilities of citizens and government. So the city has agreed to respect, all the diverse people who live in the city of Dakar with different cultures and beliefs. And the city-based organizations have agreed to act in a socially responsible way to build the city further. So now there are a couple of these slides that I want you to pay attention to. We talk about these terms and justice and inclusion and all. So I want to just ground it so that you understand what justice means, what equity means. So what is justice? So the idea of justice is well put together was in 1971, John Rawls in his book called The Theory of Justice. And basically for Rawls, the theory of justice and the justice, in a sense, means fairness to everyone. So Rawls, in his book, talked about two principles of justice. The first principle is about equal liberty. So essentially, every person should have equal rights and to the most expansive basic freedom, which are harmonious with similar freedom for others. So essentially, everybody has the same rights and liberties and freedoms. The second principle of justice of Rawls is called the difference principle, which talks about social and economic inequalities that are to be organized in a way that would be advantageous to everyone, right? If someone is not equal, then we need to provide equal opportunities and resources so that they become equal. So that's what the second principle is, and basically it involves elimination of all unwarranted privileges, creating a balance between the conflicting desires of human beings and the structure of institution. So essentially, when you think of it, equity is one school of justice. It is embedded in justice in many ways. Okay. Fourth point that I want to add here is, and this is a more recent one, Susan Feinstein in 2010 wrote a book called Just City. And the values of a just city are rooted in social rationality, understanding of collective good, and basically she believes in liberal state. She believes in strong institutions and processes, as opposed to Lafave, where he sort of say, well, go out and struggle, right? And you can throw the government out and things of that in nature. So the Just School recognizes the issue of inequity. This is for Susan Feinstein. Ask for the restoration of institutions and policies that offer inclusive benefits to the pursuit of collective rights, common good, or capabilities. Okay, so these are the few ideas under justice. Now comes equity. So I talked about equity as a part of justice, right? But it doesn't have one definition when you look at it. But we now know that equity is linked to the notions of equality, right? We need to bring everyone to equal. And then it is linked to the idea of justice. It's linked to the idea of rights that everybody has as human being, and then the fair distribution of opportunities and resources in a society. If someone has less opportunity and resources, then they need to be given as such so that there is an equal playing field. So equity is about providing more resources to those who need it, proportionate to their own circumstances, in order to ensure that everyone achieves equality in terms of the same opportunities. So if I could just say, difference between equality and equity, both promote fairness because both are part of justice. Equality achieves this by treating everyone the same, regardless of their need. Okay, so that's equality. While equity achieves this by treating people differently, because we know not everyone has the same resources, right? So it treats everyone differently depending on and according to their needs, and then providing whatever they need for them to become equal. All right, so the two concepts you have. Now, just talk a little bit about southern cities. So this is a table that you hopefully see at your end, and the words may not be very legible, but I'm going to read them out for you. So this was an article written by Devdutt Parida, who was my PhD student, and he's now a faculty at IIT Roorkee. So we too wrote this almost a year ago. So, and the reason I want to talk about southern cities and the cities in India, because how do we apply the idea of justice and equity in cities in India or in the global south, right? Because they're very different from, let's say, the global north. So the characteristics of southern cities, including Indian cities, are first, informality. Informality is omnipresent and dominant both in urban process and context, and you all know that, right? Second one is important, weak planning and governance systems in general. May not be the case in Kerala, but again, it's relatively speaking still weak in terms of governance system. So which leads to issues of transparency and corruption and coordination among actors and things of that in nature. Third is high vulnerability among city residents, particularly those who are poor and marginalized. Climate change, we talked about, any kind of economic opportunities that come to an Indian city. It's the poor and marginalized people who are relegated to the sides of whatever else is happening in the city. So they're highly vulnerable, no matter what happens. Fourth is the state and non-state actors are in persistent state of conflict. There's always this tussle going on, and it yields to lack of trust, undermining the possibility of any conventional way of doing participatory planning. Fifth is the process of urbanization in of itself. It is unprecedented in terms of both scale and temporality. And we have not seen that certainly in global north as what is happening in the global south, and especially in India. So this may be something that the panel again may want to wrestle with. How does equity apply to a city where informality is prevalent, governance is relatively weak, and conflict is persistent throughout? All right. So I looked at the literature that does talk about meaning of equity in the global south. And it doesn't tell us much, but I'll still talk a bit about it. So folks have talked about global south and southern cities as dependent cities and insurgent cities and informal cities and unplanned cities. We kind of sort of, looked at it in the previous slide. So Castells, and he puts out the idea of dependent city, where it's a space of social mobilization, but one where these energies are often co-opted by urban populism. And urban populism, according to him, is the process of establishing political legitimacy based on popular mobilization, supported by and aimed at delivery of land and housing and public services and things like that. And because state institutions are often weak and may lack the resources, capacity, or political will in addressing questions of justice, the literature often talks about social movement, insurgency, insurgent citizenship practice. And it's basically about groups sort of contesting urban justices, engage with the state or reject its legitimacy, right? And this is all in a way to reclaim the rights that they have. And that's why we talked about the conflict in the previous slide. And insurgent actors are several. They are individuals, citizens, and then there are collectives. They could be organized. But essentially, the characteristic of insurgent planning is an acute recognition that collaboration can result in complicity when inclusion or participation serves to streamline rather than obstruct the regressive process. So as you can see, there are these contestation that is happening, and some of the collaboration could result in complicity as well. So that's what scholars talk about. They also talk about the fact that informality of spaces. So Vanessa Watson, she's from South Africa, argues that planning rules cannot meet the needs of urban poor because inherently planning is elitist in nature. And so what happens is the urban poor has to break the law because they have to live somewhere. So break the law to secure the land, to secure shelter, to secure food, and things of that in nature. So the idea, one thought that I will leave you here is the southern cities are informal, they're insurgent and unplanned, but certainly not a just city that Susan Feinstein talked about, and we discussed it as part of justice. All right, so now coming to some of my work with City of Edmonton, I'll talk about that and as to where the city is and so on. But this is a typology that I have created for equity. And most of it is derived from John Rawls, The Theory of Justice. But the last one I'm going to emphasize, which is my addition, It's about regulatory equity. So there are 4 types of equity: distributional equity, recognitional equity, procedural equity, and regulatory equity. So distributional equity is about the fair distribution of goods and access to freedoms, so that we sort of develop a just and equitable society and cities. It ensures people's rights and freedoms by addressing the basic needs such as food, water, housing, education, healthcare, through the fair allocation of these resources and some responsibilities as well. Now, in the Canadian context, and I'm sure that is the case in India as well, not all of this, food, water, housing, education, healthcare, not all of them are municipal responsibilities, but housing certainly may be. In the Canadian case, access to clean water and housing is a municipal responsibility, but other ones are federal and state or provincial responsibilities. Recognitional equity is very important. It's essentially about acknowledgement of and respect for diversity that exists within a city. And I think it's very, very important. It's one of the should be primary concern of justice and equity. So in the case of Canada, I could say there is now sort of a unwritten rule that we will acknowledge. It's called land acknowledgement. And essentially what it does, it reminds every Canadian about the long-standing history of Indigenous peoples to whom the land belongs, actually. So in almost every document and whenever a presentation starts, it starts with a land acknowledgement to remind Canadians as to who the land belongs to. Procedural equity is about the decision-making process, and that needs to be fair and equitable within the institution. The regulatory equity is the 4th dimension, and it is about the legal nature of equity and legal aspect of equity. In legal parlance, is called substantive equality, and essentially it exists in the Constitution and some of the quasi-constitution obligations of the local government. So some of the tests we developed and there were no tests, mind you, that existed just even when we put it all together. So it's being used by the federal government and the provincial government in looking at all kinds of projects, not just the local government, but also the state level, the larger projects, whether it's a transportation or any other economic development. The government now requires an equity test and GBA plus analysis with a gender-based analysis as well. So this is some of the work that I did just to flesh out the idea of equity. All right. So now coming to some of the work done for the city of Edmonton on equity. This is so basically we were commissioned by the city. Some of the funds came from the federal government. We put together this report on zoning bylaw. It was essentially about the zoning bylaw of the city. It's fairly long. You can access it just if you do Agrawal Equity Edmonton, and it should just show up. But the link is right up here on the slide here. There was a paper also published based on that, and the report is fairly long. Talks about the theoretical and methodological aspect of equity as to how you apply it. How do you see whether the policy actually has inequity built into it? So it helps with that. Now, talking about Edmonton, so you need to know where Edmonton is. So what you see, the colored spaces, that's Canada, as you know, is fairly large in terms of its landmass, very small population, 40 million. Most of the people live in large cities. So the pink province that you see, called the province of Alberta. So if you go from the west, so I think from my side, I would say from left, so you're British Columbia, then Alberta, and Edmonton, the red dot that you see is where I live. It's more than 1 million people, but it's fairly large in Canadian context. And that's where this equity work was done. And Toronto is on the other side, as you can see, in Ontario, next to Ottawa. So it got some media coverage, and I said it's now some of my work is being used by different levels of the government and private sector as well. We presented it to multiple city council meetings, and so that's what that is. So here are the three objectives that that we were dealing with. First was to inform the city about what we can do as scholars to help them with the zoning bylaw renewal initiative, identify inequities into the current zoning bylaw and policy, and then what can be done in terms of equity measures. So zoning bylaw, I'm sure you all know and you have read it and worked with it, is a key regulatory tool in planning. Developed, the first one was 1916 in New York, so it has been in existence for more than 100 years. And basically, it sort of addresses the land use conflict. So residential should be separate from industrial and so on and so forth. The idea at the time it was put together was very good. But over time, it has been used to control and segregate specific communities based on income and race and so on and so forth. So it has sort of become more of a tool of discrimination and exclusion, but still being used because there's some good that can come out of it. So why we did this work? Because Edmonton zoning bylaw was not reviewed since 1961. So as you can see, over 50, 60 years. There were some updates done in 2001, so it has become very complex, lengthy document, all kinds of zones and uses. And city acknowledged that, yes, there is an issue with it, and that's the reason I was engaged to work with them. So not again going into too much of detail, here are a few things that we concluded from the study. And we said that inequity exists in multiple spheres of zoning bylaw, and not just the zoning bylaw, but also in public consultation processes, decision-making processes. But we also acknowledge the city did take some steps in bringing equity, but it has had limited effects. We also talked about the fact that just by introducing equity in zoning, just one sort of little aspect of city regulatory tool will not solve equity issues, but it should be looked at in a much more holistic way, that there are multiple dimensions of equity. Remember I talked about the procedural, the recognitional, distributional, and so on and so forth. So we said a lot of things need to change. And so we talked about significant changes, not just to the zoning bylaw, but administrative changes, procedural changes, and governance changes as well. Just again, not go into too much of detail because you may not be able to completely relate to the issues that a Canadian city may face. So distributional inequity in the case of Edmonton was more to do with restrictive housing type. So the way zoning was laid out, I should say, it just did not allow multiple forms of housing. It could only do one type, which is single detached. Recognition and inequity was more to do with the acknowledgement of different diverse people who live in the city. And it did exist in the city plan, which is, the master plan, but nothing was talked about in the zoning itself. Procedural inequity was more to do with appeals process, and that was dissatisfactory. There were some structural systemic issues as well. And then regulatory inequity was more to do with how the zoning bylaw was crafted and different uses and the overlays and zones were created, which excluded a large part of Edmontonians, the people who live in Edmonton. So here's a quote that I just wanted to put it out here. And I think it's quite powerful if you read it. So I'm going to just read the red part. Edmonton has a very long history of just building more and more single detached housing. So only single detached. You can't have multiple stories. You can't have multiple people living. So single detached only for one family. which is becoming less and less affordable. And just switching to the next red text, by designating large swaths of land or a neighborhood or a residential only for a single family, it obviously only allows a certain segment of society to access those spaces, whether that's by income or other means. So that would, I think, be the most blatant and obvious inequity that exists. So what we did was to help planners at the city. We created these libraries of historical negative externalities, library of equity regulations, and that brought a lot of these things together. So whenever the city planner has to put together a new zoning bylaw or a bylaw of any sort, they can look at what they are doing might lead to some form of inequity to the people who live there, and they can check their own work, and sort of it provides a gateway to look at the information readily right on their fingertips. So all of that work was done, and then actually changes were made. So the new zoning bylaw came into effect as of 1st January of this year. It introduced flexible zoning, so allowing more housing type. It removed some of the discretionary elements. So some of the neighborhoods would not allow places of worship like churches and temples. It wouldn't allow daycare facilities. So there were a lot of restrictions. So that has been loosened up a little bit. It adjusted the development processes, introduced the concept of 15-minute city. That is, that you can access any of the amenities by walking 15 minutes or by taking a public transit, whether you have to go to a grocery store or a place of worship or what have you. So those are the changes that were made in the bylaw. Okay, so just a couple of more slides. So what does it all mean for India? So India, and again, I do most of my work, as I say, rights in the city, more from the legal perspective. So India, if you look at it from equity perspective as well, and you see there are fundamental rights in the Constitution of India, right to the protection of life and personal liberty, right to be treated equally, right to be protected against any discrimination. You can freely move anywhere in the country, right to practice any occupation. So all good things are included in the Indian Constitution. Then we have other rights as well. These are sort of put together through national acts. They are not constitutionally guaranteed. So right to housing, right to rather forest, and we know this quite well, is basically more of right to indigenous peoples of India. So it gives rights to those scheduled tribes and other forest dwellers who have the right to have forest land, because that will help them ensure their livelihood and food security. Right to fair compensation, transparency in land acquisition. Now, this is a very, sort of troublesome place. I know there are changes happening there, but, it sort of introduces some idea of participatory planning within or inclusion of people within land acquisition. Street Vendors Act, remember I talked about right to work, occupy the space. So this is about legal recognition of street vendors so that they're not evicted or relocated without any due process. But we know that not much has happened. In fact, only 1/4 of all the towns have vending plants now, which was required by the act. Basic infrastructure for vendors are missing. And also we know that still vendors are being forced out, resulting in harassment and eviction. Right to information has worked apparently quite well. So RTI has led to how it has worked in urban setting is that one could access information and issues like any unauthorized occupancies of land, or look at what is public and what is private and what the people's rights are and things like that. right to participate, obviously, and right to housing, they're not rights guaranteed in Constitution. But if you look at some of the Supreme Court decisions, Supreme Court on multiple occasions has at least upheld the right to housing under the right to life. So that's where some movement has happened. Now, this is a very last slide. As the previous presenters mentioned, Kerala has made strides in bringing equity and inclusion in urban spaces and across the state, but issues still remain. We know that it's work in progress. So here are a few examples that my student Nimil, and he's on the call here as well, who helped me put this together and may be familiar to all of you. This is Adani's port project near Thiruvananthapuram, which is affecting people's lives and livelihood, and right to participate in some ways is being contested there. This was an interesting one the second one, providing access to everyone, including Dalits in barbershops. So apparently Dalits were discriminated to go into barbershops. So this is Panchayat in Idukki. They put together a public barbershop where everyone can go. So more of a positive example of it. The third one is Adivasis in Wayanad, and which is a forested area quite a bit, and the Forest Rights Act, and they are fighting for their right to forest. So as you can see, a lot of these issues are being dealt with, and there are some positive examples coming out of it, while there are others that are yet to come to a fruition. So with this, I just wanted to end by saying that I implore all of you to engage, because it's us. It takes all of us to be part of this and to make places, spaces, and cities more inclusive and equitable. And each one of us will have to do our part to make this happen. So with that, thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions if there's a time, but happy to stick around to see what others have to say in the coming presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I hope I'm audible. So because of the technical difficulties, I couldn't present myself. I'm Rajiv. So thank you, Professor Dr. Sandeep, for discussing on the important topic for zoning for equity and justice, wherein Professor has shared with us the basic fundamental definitions of justice and equity and all the linked notions that come across with it, which leads us to the thinking that we should have as planners of planning for just cities. And then where Professor has introduced kind of again told us who are from India also the characteristics of the Indian cities, the concerns that we deal with, uncertainty and not planned scenarios, and the cities already developed, which we are grappling with. And slowly then Sir took us to his study on Edmonton, where he did discuss the kind of equity measures and zoning that can be brought in at through bylaw level and regulations. Like Sir did introduce or discuss with us on flexible zoning and the recommendations also which was proposed summarily, which was discussed. The main highlight being that the need for a holistic approach in dealing with such aspects. So thank you very much, sir, for sharing your insightful presentation and thoughts on the given topic. So with that, we move forward. So the question answer session we will take towards the end together with all the participants and the discussants also once that panel discussion is done. So if you don't mind, it will be good to have you over for that session as well. So with that, we move to the next session, that is the panel discussion. So before we begin with the panel discussion, we thought that I will introduce to the panelists and the audience also how we are proceeding with today's panel discussion. So initially, we will be introducing individual panelists or discussants for this panel discussion. and we'll be telling them whom we will be discussing with and their thoughts and ideas on the theme of planning for equity and inclusion for urban justice, followed by which we'll have a discussion amongst the panelists wherein we'll have some questions which we can debate upon or discuss upon and derive some insights which can help uh, conclude this session also. So with that, I hand over to our comparer Siri. So we are seeing Siri also now because of the technical difficulties earlier. There was a glitch. So over to you, Siri. Siri, you can introduce Dr. Barsha, who is our first discussant. Then we have Professor Sashwat, second discussant. Then we have Dr. Binoy Peter, our third discussant, and Dr. Kumali, who is our fourth discussant. So over to you, Siri. Thank you.
So am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, Siri.
Dr. Darshan Puricha, ma'am, is a director with demonstrated history of working in the non-profit organization management industry. She is skilled in non-profit organizations, program implementation, sustainability, program evaluation, and strategic planning. She has a PhD and a master's degree focused in urban and regional planning from Ambedkar University, Delhi, and SET Ahmedabad. Decades of experience in institution building, development, and planning issues of the country. She has held multiple roles in a variety of projects. Ma'am, we invite you to discuss on your perspective on the topic today.
Thank you so much. And because of so many technical glitches, let me ask the most repeated question. Am I audible and am I clear?
Yes, ma'am,
I
you're
am?
audible.
Okay.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Rajiv. And at the end of the day, it's a tough subject that you all have before us: equity, inclusion, justice. A very interesting one, but nonetheless, let me begin by thanking all of you for giving me this opportunity to come and share some of my thoughts around what we understand and mean by equity and justice. Give me a minute when I let me just put up my PowerPoint presentation. I am not able to share. Okay, I can now. Can you see it now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, madam. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But for some reason, I can't see my presentation. So give me a minute to put this, and that is always my worry. Which digital? Give me a second. Okay, so if you have no, can I just put my video off and then, does this make it clearer? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so thank you so much. And yes, so thank you so much. And as I mentioned, Professor Agarwal and Professor Ramesh before that have already set the context. I just had a quick question for the moderator. Rajiv, can you tell us how much of time do I have so that I can put in my thoughts accordingly? Because I guess we're already stretched over.
We'll have almost 7 minutes for each speaker.
Gosh. Okay.
And then
So
we
to
move
be-
into a quick, very quick, super quick panel discussion because we ran out of time. First 15
I
minutes
know.
we only took. Sorry.
I know. That's okay. So there's this other equity and inequity issue, right? So that's where I begin with. So very quickly, let me not repeat myself because Professor Agrawal has already set the context. Looking at urban planning and understanding urban planning from the context of what is it that we understand when we are As students, what do we understand when we talk about urban planning? It's an art of shaping cities, which is already mentioned. I'll get back directly to just let me introduce myself. As Siri was mentioning, I work with a non-profit. I work with an NGO in the country, and we are called the Center for Urban and Regional Excellence. And I personally have been working on the subject of urban informalities and urban slums for now 2 decades and over. So my insights today will be based around this particular content that I have been engaging myself with over the past 2 decades. So some of the challenges that emerge in urban spaces, and that's what leads to the inequity and the exclusion that we've been trying to address today with the Kerala Urban Dialogues. So as Professor Agrawal again mentioned, I'll not get into it, but nearly 1 in 4 urban residents live in informality. So informality is actually right there in front of us, and even if we have the best of policies, programs, we know in a country like India, it is a very challenging and a very an issue which needs to be addressed, but it's one of the most challenging issues. So that's something that needs to be worked around. Housing. Then the second is environment. We look at all kinds of the environmental and climate change issues that we're speaking about today: air pollution, heat, cold, you name it. And the marginalized and the urban informal sector is, and the settlements are the ones which are impacted with this the most. So there is an inequity that we see directly in the economics of the city. We know that there have been studies which have come up from the country, which have said that nearly 60 to 65% of the city's growth, and I could be actually under quoting myself, but nearly 60 to 65% of the city's growth is around the informal economies. But somehow when the city gets spoken about, and as Professor Agrawal was also mentioning, it becomes an elite just city concept. So that's something that we need to work with. Transport, mobility, we have the entire ability issues, we have gender issues, which need to be worked around more to be able to understand how is it that we can ensure some equity in the mobility and transport section. A subject which doesn't get spoken about much when we speak about urban planning is around health. And health, when we speak about the marginalized, the informal economies, the informal settlements, the people who are actually working in the cities, are somehow the accessibility to public health systems is there is a disconnect, and we've been speaking regularly about it. Some of it gets addressed, but a lot still is out there for us to look at. And the last, as we all know, it's about governance and participation. These are contested spaces, and with every scheme, every act that we have from the country, we do put in some ideas about citizens engagement. We talk about outreach, but actually when we get to the ground, we understand and we all realize that it is still the marriage between the bottom up and the top down is still there is a lot to be spoken about. So there is still a disconnect over there. Why do we need equity inclusion? Let me just skip this slide in the interest of time. And what does urban justice actually imply? Urban justice implies when all of this that we spoke about in challenges, social inclusion, public spaces, equitable distribution, health, all of them are, everybody living in the city has a sense of access and a sense of affordability to be able to integrate oneself within these services. Primarily, it speaks about access to resources that we have been talking about. And then we suddenly have this entire gamut that we are looking at, the slums and squatters, which we understand. And since I've been engaging with it, this is going to be my point of investigation and sharing of my experiences from this particular aspect. So slums and squatters, as we know, they are one of the most inequitable spaces that we have. They are on fragile geographies. They are on absolute. They are there near landfills. They are there near transport. They are there near rail stations. They are in a sense, they are in one of the most unequal spaces that you find in the city, is where the slums and squatters come up. And the reasons, as I've already mentioned above, I don't need to speak about it. Some of the broad rationales that we know why in India particularly we have this form of unequal housing is because of there are lots of things that are there, but broadly it is about migration, better aspiration, better opportunities in the city, a perceived better opportunity in the city, better opportunity to healthcare, education, which brings in people. But when they come here, there is unequal distribution of resources, which leads to the settlement that we are looking at. But when we're looking at these people over there in our cities, they are the ones, as I said, nearly 60 to 65% of the city's growth, or maybe more, is around the work of these people. So it is around, they are the people who actually pick up the waste. They are the ones who actually clear out the construction sites. They help in your construction. They are there in the domestic work, street vending, and you name it, in all the services. And I don't need to, all of us are aware of it. Now, what are the challenges that one faces in terms? This is actually a slum settlement that I have been working with. These are pictures taken by the organization that I live in. I live in, absolutely, but I work with in the organization. So this is the kind of slum. For students who've not been to a slum, this is in Delhi, and this is the kind of living conditions that they live in. And this is what we need to address when we look at equity, inclusion, and justice. So I'll not get into this type because Professor Agarwal has already done. So what does CURE do? CURE is an NGO working in Delhi, and we are a group of planners and architects. And we have been, over the past 2 decades and more, have been trying to unthink, reimagine, innovate, and de-engineer some ideas around informal settlements, informal economies, and how do we actually integrate some of these unequal sites into the urban planning framework, into urban governance, and into urban management. So what I have before you in the next, because I know I've already exceeded my 5 minutes, another 2 to 3, please. I think I'll be able to finish it in the next 3-4 minutes. So what do we do in the next couple of slides? I will try to share some of these very tangible interventions that CURE has done to be able to actually turn this idea, which is there in theory somewhere, about equity, what is equity, what is inclusion, what is justice, into some form of reality on the ground. So these are going to be some interesting interventions that we've done. And before I talk about these interventions, let me tell you that all these interventions take time. It takes time. If you're actually wanting to do inclusion, equity, and justice, please give yourself some time, because you need to get people on board. There is rapport building, there is participation that needs to be worked around. And unless you're able to do that, the collectivization, the communities have to be at the core. Unless you're able to do that, the interventions and the ideas that we've been talking about may not get addressed in the way that we want. So what we try to do is, we of course look at the entire ecological approach, because when we're looking at sustainability and resilience, you need to look at the entire ecosystem within you. For us, communities are at the core, because that's what we work with. We understand how to engage with communities. We understand how to build community groups. We understand how to mobilize them, and we understand how to capacitate them so that they are able to take the solutions forward. And we understand how to localize them. So a very interesting study, and since it's about inequity, so I wanted to pick up this particular story that we have, not a story, but a site that we had in Rourkela. And this was, as the name suggests, it's called the leprosy colony. The first form of inequity that you have is when you start naming these colonies with disadvantaged names. So the moment you hear leprosy colony, they're out of that sense of equity. So, but anyways, when you're working over there, this was about, there were about 75 households completely marginalized on the edge of any form of development. And the issues were immense. There was, of course, infrastructure issues. There were community toilet issues, which were non-functional, because all of you must know that when they are in a leprosy colony, a lot of people use wheelchairs. Now, these wheelchairs, if they are not able to enter into a community toilet, what kind of inclusion are you speaking about? So we started working with this community, and I just want to speak about some of the interventions which happened. It was around making these infrastructures accessible. It was around developing livelihoods which would help people find their own voice and start getting mainstreamed into the larger society. Because it was a colony which had a physical disability, it was very necessary for them to be recognized, and the stigma that is attached to the particular medical issues that they have, that needed to be addressed. So we started working with livelihoods. We started getting women's collectives together, and we started getting the self-help groups over there. And today it is extremely interesting that the Rourkela Municipal Corporation has actually taken up some of these SHG groups and made them trainers to be able to impart this kind of training to other SHGs in the city, and some form of integration, at least recognizing them as people with a voice, has come about in the last 6-7 years. The second is around, as I said, I'm not going to show this film, but it's a very interesting film, but around infrastructure. So this was about a social stigma. This is about infrastructure. So water stress is one form of inequity that we've been looking at for a long time, and all of us recognize that. This is in Agra. When we started, this is, of course, a marginalized urban settlement, and they were facing the maximum amount of water stress at that point of time. We started by de-engineering, as I said, Cure works around de-engineering ideas. We started with getting the local knowledge, local wisdom, started talking about rainwater harvesting system about 15 years back. And that's when this particular system got built with the people, with women, children, and the ideas and the impact was so strong that it was built into the Agra Smart City mission. Of course, the positive side of the infrastructure was the water harvesting was 1.5 million liters per year. The household saved 700 rupees. But what is more exciting and interesting is one engineering solution of this kind was able to bring in social agency. What happened was, in the subsequent years, when Agra went through a severe rain shortage, it was the communities with upper castes who in the neighboring areas, which then started engaging with this community because of rainwater harvesting, they were able to have ample water and also to share water. So that was the first form of communication which happened, and some form of caste transcendation did happen through a physical infrastructure project. So I'm just trying to share some of these ideas by which the ideas of equity and justice can actually be implemented within a city. The third was around this particular area, which is a resettlement colony in Delhi called Savda Gevra. Again, an engineering solution, which was a simplified sewer system, which connected 322 households with toilets. And that particular intervention then started getting women to start spending some time around other incomes. It brought in more money into the households. And one particular toilet was able to take the household from a below poverty income level to take them out of that poverty cycle, to be able to send the children to school, to be able to access healthcare, and to able to aspire for something better than what they had. So one form of intervention is when you have taps and toilets at home, at least the women then become, there are some capacities built, there is some voice which comes in, and they're able to get into other forms of income generation. This is again another engineering initiative, again a simplified sewer networking system in a basti called Safeda, which again, this is all these stories that I'm telling you is about 6-7 years old, but we still continue and the impact is still felt today. So one idea which is able to sow itself around the issues that we've been discussing is able to reap larger benefits than one had actually imagined when one had started intervening in the area. The last is something that I will leave thoughts with. It is an intervention that we are currently doing in Delhi. It's Hanuman Camp. It's right in the New Delhi area. For those of you who are familiar with Delhi, this is called the Hanuman Camp, and it's a 500 household settlement, which is primarily the occupation is around waste management. Now, these are people who actually are the waste collectors of the entire city. And when they come back to the settlement, the Barapula Nala, Barapula is the main stormwater drainage trunk line for Delhi, which takes out all the excess water that in case Delhi has. This is the main trunk line. And one of the connections to the Barapula passes through this particular settlement. It is a settlement which is in one of the most fragile areas within New Delhi. It is in a trough. So if you can imagine, all the water which is on the higher lands flows into this particular trough because it is a low-lying area. So that is what Hanuman Camp is. I just wanted to share this to show that the fragile economies, the fragile spatial settlements that they are in. And so the interventions around there actually, when we started speaking to them, one of the striking conversations that we had with one of these groups was that I'm sure most of you will be familiar with Hindi, that हम लोग तो सबका कूड़ा उठाते हैं, but कूड़ा हमारे यहाँ से कहीं नहीं जाता है. So we collect the waste from everybody, but somehow this legacy waste that we have over here, we are unable to work with it. Now that was something that we started to work with. Today, we've got, what I want to say is when we started building up these capacities of these people, today they can go and negotiate with the junior engineer, which they have been doing. They've got the drain cleaned. After, I think, about 25 years, the drain got cleaned. There is an idea of trying to work around design issues on the drain so that so that we can restrict some of this waste falling into the drain. We are working with children around making safe play spaces so that they when they go to school, they are more enabled, they are more informed, they are more happier youngsters who can go to school and actually benefit from the school system. We are working with women. We are working. So what one is trying to say is through all these interventions, which is of course an intensive process, but we're trying to enable a sense of pride and ownership for the people who are living there, because unless that is there, it's going to be very difficult to address any forms of equity and inclusion. So having said that, these are some of, we're working around, of course, livelihood options. We are trying to understand how do women start engaging with livelihood, so that all of us understand the moment there is woman starts engaging in livelihoods, there is a certain voice that she gets in the house, and that is where she starts getting included in the decision making process. So I will stop here because I think I've overshot my time, but I'd like to hear the other panelists too. But I'll stop here, but would be happy to take any questions or clarifications which are there. So yes, thank you so much.
Sorry for rushing you through the discussion.
Yes, I will just, thank you so much. No worries.
Some interventions on building resilience and slums now. Next panelist. Our next panelist, Professor Saswat Bandyopadhyay, urban planning professional with advanced qualifications in climate resilient urban development and infrastructure planning in secondary cities. He has a PhD in climate resilient practices and presently is a senior professor in the urban infrastructure program at IISER University. 25 years of experience in the urban development sector in South Asia, with a focus on city development planning and designing of environmental infrastructure, and has spearheaded several flagship initiatives such as Inclusive Heritage-Based City Development Program, the IHCDP, Sustainable Urban Development, and Smart Cities, and peer-to-peer learning, amongst others. I welcome you, sir, to share your thoughts on our topic of discussion today.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, and also good morning to colleagues joining from West Coast. I'm Shashwat Bandyopadhyay. I work as a professor in the university at CEPT. Unfortunately, as you know, that last 2 days there has been a large amount of rain and flood-like situation. So we are in a bit of a problematic situation at this moment. So I won't be able to start up my camera because many of the facilities have been shut down. But first of all, let me thank you, SPA Vijayawada, particularly Professor Adinarayana, Rajiv, and other colleagues. Also, my colleagues from Kila. I see Dr. Ajit and a few others, Irene and others are here. And also my fellow panelists. So we have heard from my previous two speakers about the notions of equity, justice, inclusion. What I work about how spatial planning responses to some of these challenges. So much of my work that I do, also the research and so my advisory work, as some of you probably know, I also work closely with some of the statutory planning processes in some of the cities. So my talk here, I don't have just to assure you, I don't have a PPT to share, so I'll walk the talk today. So much of my work is, I want to share about how a spatial planning or the planning system, the process that we have inherited, how we are trying to respond or not responding to some of the emerging challenges that has been spoken by previous two speakers and panelists. As you all know, in India, the way we understand urban planning or the urban planning is situated in our context is very much different than way it is perceived in different other contexts. So starting with, we started with this idea of master planning. And this terminology prevails in many parts of the country still today, starting from Chandigarh, Gandhinagar, of course, in Naya Raipur and other areas. So where it was a greenfield and, a master plan fit for construction is prepared. Followed by, we inherited a process, what we call statutory planning, which is very, very prominent, which is embedded in the state acts. Most states, planning and urban being a state subject, it is inherited in the State Urban Planning Act and regulation. So every state has its Town Planning Act or Urban Development Act and regulation. Some of you, those are if you are studying in planning schools, would be familiar with this Town Planning Act and regulation. Much of it we have inherited from the British planning system. And our statutory planning, whether we call it as a development plan, master plan, comprehensive development plan, originates and guided by this planning legislation, town planning legislation. And this is what we often also call formal planning system. And as you know, since these are all, the acts and legislation which is seated on the, formal system, as rightly pointed out by two previous speakers, they do not acknowledge the informality, the scale of informality that we get to see in our cities. So we prepare plan, particularly this form of statutory plans, which are basically responding to the formal part or the formal, land use owners, landowners in the city. And there are two major components in this plan, which is to provide you, some kind of regulation on the private plot through zoning or building bylaws. And the second part is to provide access to public goods and services, maybe, the common properties or the access to road, transportation, and common resources. However, this form of planning that we have inherited over a period of time, you will realize that it is only catering to a part of this city or some of the landholders in the city. And so this part, we call it as a statutory plan, and these plans were not implementable, and it was reflected by works of some of the scholars like Professor Ananya Roy, also Venetia Watson, that a formal planning approach or formal planning system to an informal ecosystem. And many of you, in your studios, in planning school, what we practice is this kind of a statutory planning, or sometimes we call them a physical planning or a land use planning. We try to allocate a use of land based on, certain nuances, but that ignores or marginalizes a large amount of city population, because largely people who don't have access or rights to the land or, tenureship, they get marginalized. So this was the first part where we have been, preparing master plan, land use plan, which eventually, led to formation of ghettos or, certain areas, which is people can't access to housing with limited services, as previous speaker was showing some of these, colonies in Delhi, JJ colonies, etc. The second wave, which started in early 2000, which is a kind of a form of a, non-statutory plans. And there was a waves of plans which was linked to mission, because since these plans were not working, and government started, starting something like JNNURM, IDSSMT, and later Amrut mission, or certain amount of mission which was, delivered, conceptualized, and started delivering directly certain amount of projects which are not necessarily linked with the spatial planning. So in earlier days, we have a lot of projects which is linked to city development plan, Rajiv Awas Yojana, also presently since 2014 and 2015, we have waves of smart city projects, also Amrut and other. So we have lot of this kind of, so presently a kind of a sense of confusion that what is the purpose of urban planning and what are we expecting from this urban planning as a tool. So generally, the expectation is that urban planning will provide, public goods and services or enabling condition for public goods and services, or manage certain amount of nuisance that are generated because of planning or externalities like pollution, etc. The second, which is a very predominant expectation, that these plans will, deliver certain amount of, projects, which is, very visualized goods for the citizen. So we are at this stage presently, and as a result, we are, unsure about how planning internalize some of these challenges, the issues of equity, inclusion, justice, also the aspects of climate resilience, etc. So what we have been looking at it in this restrictive framework, what kind of planning processes, given our statutory planning framework, how and what kind of inclusion and kind of addition of our responses to changing context like resilience could be possible. So I want to bring 2-3 very interesting and important activities that have been happening in some of our context. Some of you know there is a tool called town planning scheme at a very local level. The town planning schemes which are taken up at around 200 to 300 acres. So what is done here, because otherwise, as Professor Agarwal's presentation was highlighting, that large dwelling is marginalizing and also prohibiting the access of poor in the land market in the downtown cities. So what was done here is that we use a term called inclusionary regulation and inclusionary zoning. Now here, every town planning scheme that are being developed with 200, 250 acre, a certain percentage of layouts are reserved for people from our urban poor community, and that allowed development of social housing, also poor getting access to land at the very central level. And this has been quite successful in cities, particularly in state of Gujarat, where the major medium of development has been the town planning scheme. The second tool, which also happened in states of Tamil Nadu, states of Gujarat, and certain other places, they also have created a fiscal tool called Shelter Fund, which is another tool which is allowing a certain segment of population who are denied access to decent land and habitat in the downtown. The most recently, and that I think those of you who are planning student can find it very, very interesting, is that what we call in inclusionary zoning in a master plan. And this is what in Ahmedabad, the draft development plan of Ahmedabad and the last development plan of Ahmedabad, if some of you open, you'll realize that there is an entire area which has been allocated along the ring road, which is called inclusionary zoning, which would give, it's an overlay zone which will allow the entire affordable housing. So this is called residential affordable housing zoning along a particular transport corridor. And this is what, when you overlay this zone, you allow, incentivize all kind of developers to come and offer housing which are actually catering to certain income segment. And this has been a path breaker because, as all of you know, the cost of land or access to land has been very prohibitive for providing affordable housing or any form of social housing. So these three cases is also available in a form of a publication, which me and my colleagues have done from CEPT University Press, called how you accelerate and incentivize inclusionary zoning as a part of urban planning tool. Because urban planning tool that we have inherited is in a very restrictive as a tool because it is embedded in a state specific act, and it allows you to do only certain things. You may say, okay, I want to do this thing, but if you use the urban planning as it understood in various state specific contexts, it allows you to only do certain amount of development control regulation. It allows you to do certain amount of public goods and services, and also allow you to incentivize in certain form. So I think, the challenges of the kind of, massive and hidden urbanization that we are witnessing in India. So this is what I think some of these tools needs to be explored in the planning school, because we as a urban planner are working in the spatial plan, whether it is town plan, local area plan, or a kind of a zonal plan or a city level development plan. We need to identify those specific tools and how we can actually work on them to allow some of this inclusionary regulation, inclusionary zoning, and enabling the people who deserve access of land and basic services and social infrastructure at the heart of the city. So these are some of the good practices. I will strongly recommend all of those of you who are interested to see how we are working with the existing tools and practices. Lastly, very recently, what has been happening is we are also changing some of the state town planning legislation. So the legislation of recent draft legislation of Uttar Pradesh, draft town planning legislation of Tamil Nadu, draft legislation of Jammu Kashmir, where we are also trying to bring certain aspects so that these elements, which are generally the challenges that as highlighted by some of the previous speakers, can be embedded in while we are delivering the building regulation as well as various levels of plan, mainly the statutory plan and some cases town planning and local area plan. So that's what I wanted to share. And if some of you are interested, I would again invite you to see some of the publication at our CEPT University Press or GI German International Cooperation publication. That will probably see how some of these notions are being embedded, but still we have miles to go, kind of urbanization that we are seeing and also anticipating in coming years. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Ashwat sir, for sharing your knowledge on town planning acts and legislations, the shortcomings, challenges, the steps to counter these, the statutory planning approach, and its role in the marginalized population. And we definitely be very fortunate enough to access or have a glimpse of your publications, which will definitely help us in our career in planning. I would like to call upon our next panelist, Dr. Vinay Kutu, sir. Dr. Vinay has over 2 decades experience working with marginalized populations in India. Dr. Kutu has a PhD in population sciences from the Department of Migration and Urban Studies, the International Institute for Population Sciences. He is the co-founder of the Center for Migration and Inclusive Development, CMID, a non-profit organization for the social inclusion of migrants in India. He is also a member of the International Advisory Committee that guides explain the preparation of the action plan for the implementation of the national strategy on internal displacement of the government of Bangladesh. Dr. Peter has also been the technical director of the UNDP funded project led by Gram Vikas to respond to COVID-19 and migration in Asia. He has been a consultant to USAID India's Project Samagra from 2020 to 2025 implemented by PSI to improve the health outcomes of the urban poor in India. He has immense experience of working with the government, the civil society, bilateral and multilateral organizations, and the private sector. I welcome you, Bilal sir, to share your experiences and thoughts on today's topic.
Thank you, Siri, and thanks everybody for inviting me for this. I think it's already one minute to 8, so I know everybody will be anxious and there are other schedules to attend, so I'll be as brief as possible. And from the key panelists who made elaborate discussion on the zoning aspects of Edmonton, we all know how zoning and exclusions happen, and generally what happens in the case of low-income populations also we came to know from Basha's presentation. And Professor Bandyopadhyay also elaborated on certain aspects that are to be taken care of while we do the detailed city planning. So I thought I'll just take 2 minutes to talk about who are part of the city, and then how we certain people are left behind in terms of planning. So broadly, we can divide those who are part of an urban ecosystem to people who live there and people who visit the area. So it would be a commuter, or it would be a visitor or tourist. So I'm talking about people who live in the city, in the urban area. So in this, there are broadly 2 categories. So the natives and the migrants. So when we know from the past, the speakers explain how the natives get marginalized. For example, in the case of cities in Kerala, it's primarily the Dalits and the fisher folk. So a lot of our cities are along the coast, and then the marginalized population in these cities are primarily the Dalits, the SCs, and the fisher folk. Now there has been a detailed movie called Kamatti Padam, which explain how the marginalized populations within the city are get excluded over a period of time as the city evolves. And with this Dalits and fisher folk, we have now one more addition, who are migrants. There are different streams of migrants. There are intrastate migrants who speak the same language and then have a lot of rights which are portable. And there are people who are interstate migrants who come from other parts of the country, particularly in the case of Kerala, it's mostly from eastern and northeastern Indian states. And then among these migrants, there are permanent migrants like you or many of us who come and settle and do a formal job or into stuff which are formal. But the temporary migrants who are there for a while for their living. So I'm more concerned about this particular group of temporary interstate migrants, primarily because when we talk about equity, we need to look at those populations who are the most marginalized, and how do we make sure that they also get equal opportunities when it comes to treatment. So which means we would require substantial investment in terms of measures of equity to make sure that the city doesn't exclude this population. For example, most of our rights and entitlements are decided on your nativity. And particularly if you're part of the electoral role of that area. in terms of the experience in Kerala cities, I think Kerala cities are far more better in terms of their inclusive approach compared to many other parts where housing and water sanitation, everything is a challenge for migrants. But the way Kerala's demography has transitioned, the way some of our districts have become with a negative population growth, or the way the state is going to become to experience an active population growth soon. Uh, we see 1 in every 4 worker in the state, a migrant worker from other states. And in the case of Kochi, the Ernakulam district, which is the industrial capital, it's 1 in every 2 people. So these people are face a lot of exclusions, and I think it's typical of the migrants, so I am not elaborating. The language is one of the major barriers. Then electoral rights. So the political representative, the elected representatives of the urban local bodies do find them accountable more to the people who are part of the electoral rolls, who have a voting right, who decide on their being elected member or not. So the political participation, then linguistic barriers, then in terms of access to housing or various other aspects, these people fall behind. And there are also other people who are as part of development they get displaced, who are from the city but they get displaced, and many times they are also not taken care of while we do an inclusive planning. So what is most important when we do an urban planning, to taking into account of equity, is having evidence. We should try to understand who are the people who are the most marginalized and how then only we will that needs evidence. So we need to collect evidence on vulnerabilities of the household. So we were discussing at Kila what could be done. We could even do a household wise, every household wise we can develop a vulnerability index of in all our urban local bodies, in each ward, taking each dwelling we can do a vulnerability index. We can do a vulnerability indexing, which can be aggregated to make sure that those who have multiple vulnerabilities are getting a lot more investments in terms of making sure that they are included. I think currently the interstate migrants are not considered by the urban local bodies as a marginalized population, because they're primarily because they're not part of the electoral role. So it is important that when we are planning with a forward-looking planning with emphasis on equity, should emphasize on migrant inclusive urban governance. And I'm sure people like Dr. Ajit, who are part of this initiative, are taking a lot of effort to make sure that migrant workers are considered or taken into account in inclusive urban planning. So so this is one aspect not only important for Kerala, but also even in the international context, given the rise of xenophobia, which we even see in many parts of the global north. So a starting point is looking at the evidence and sensitizing those part of the planning process to ensure that people like migrant workers, the Dalits, those who are displaced, or the fishers who are already marginalized and who are much more vulnerable to the climate-related challenges the cities in Kerala are facing now, so that we move towards a much more equitable cityscape. Thank you very much.
For the insightful words on the topic of the day. Dr. Konali, ma'am. She's the co-director of UN UK Regional Support Office. She's also the senior research fellow, School of Engineering and Computing, Teamwork. Dr. Konali has performed research on a range of topics such as coastal vulnerability, coastal erosion, rise, climate change, water infrastructure, GIS, disasters, and risk reduction, research methods, environmental systems and management, and also engineering management. She has over 10 years of teaching experience in research methods, environmental engineering, and geomorphology. Also in sustainability, governance, water treatments, innovative environmental technology, climate change, and natural hazards. Now, we invite you to share your thoughts on the topic for the day.
Thank you so much, Siri, for the introduction. I believe it is more than 8 in India. So many students have a long day, so they are waiting to go home. I don't want to take that much of time. And I will take 2 minutes, just 2 minutes. So I have only 3 slides. So even though it is a Kerala urban dialogue, the previous speakers have already covered majority of the things. Just I want to show a local case study, Vijayawada case study. I am from a local Vijayawada, born and brought up from Vijayawada, settled in the UK. So we have done a research in 2019 for a funding project. I want to show some urban slums. So maybe which helps to compare the urban cities in between the Kerala and Andhra Pradesh. So I'm going to share those slides, just 3 slides I have. I am very sorry, I can't able to share these things because I don't know, some technical problem or something. Just I would like to explain what I have done. So we have done a project in Krishna. So we have seen so many unauthorized houses in Krishna River. So total means some poor people totally occupied some of the places in the Krishna River, and they have constructed the houses without having any town planning or the government permission. But surprisingly, they have a water connection, they have a power connections, and everything they have. So rather than passing the new rules and regulations, I have understood that we need an actions to control urbanization, urban poor, and urban sanitations. So these are the things I have identified. So I am going to conclude because it is a long day to all the people, especially to the students. They want to go to the home. So now open for the questions or something. Already it is a 8:10 or something like that. Thank you so much for the opportunity to the management. So for this one, maybe in the future, maybe we can discuss more because there is no time at the moment. Especially special thanks to Adinarayana sir and Rajiv and behind the scenes who are conducting this event. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you all discussants. So we now move into our panel discussion. So we've heard the audience, all audience have heard from individual discussants who are experts in their own fields, with Barsha ma'am, who have done extensive work on slums in India as part of her job or her designation at Cure India. We have Binoy sir, who have been working significantly with marginalized communities and migrant laborers. And we have Shashwat sir, who is an academician who has been working with city governments on inclusive planning. And we have Kumali madam, who have been extensively working on coastal vulnerability, coastal communities. So we have these four experts from various fields whom we have tried to put together as part of this panel discussion. And to start off this discussion, which might extend, I hope, which we can complete in another 10-15 minutes. I know that we have stressed the time a bit, but I apologize to my students whom I've kept them waiting and the rest of the audience. But within 15 minutes, I think we can wrap up the entire thing. After this panel discussion, we will have one presentation on coastal climate justice by a graduate of ours. So before that, the question for panel discussion or the thought for panel discussion, which I feel is that means in the pursuit for urban development goals that we are moving across, moving towards, and in a state like Kerala, where we have made significant strides and significant progress on social fronts, how can we ensure that this pursuit for urban justice remains a priority in this phase of these competing urban development goals? That is one part of my question. And the second part is that if at all we can intervene or if we can ensure that, are there any metrics or indicators that we can use to assess this progress also? So I would like to hear from our discussants on this aspect, which can extend into a discussion with the audience also, and wherein our audience can also speak up. I hope I was audible.
I have a question, Rajiv, to the keynote speaker, Agarwal, Professor Agarwal. Agarwal, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes.
Thank you so much for a very informative talk. Can I ask you one question? What difference you have identified between the Canadian cities and the Indian cities, especially in the urbanization and implementing the new strategies or the improving the strategies to make them a life free means to improve the community's life?
Thanks for the question. It's a pretty loaded question. I'll try to answer as quickly as possible. I think this work on equity and inclusion and justice is a work in progress. Even a place like Canada, where we have laws, constitutional guarantees, and we have human rights acts for each province, and cities have very strong governance. We see how inequities are built into policies and regulations. Some of them, not everything is like overt, but there are covert sort of way of putting some of these inequities in zoning bylaws and policies and legislation. But I think over time they are being recognized and being removed as they come to attention. One thing I just want to highlight, that the federal government has taken a very strong step. Literally every project, local, provincial / state, any projects where there's a federal funding that goes in, equity, inclusion, and GBA plus gender-based analysis must be done. So I think it's a huge leap on this front. The issue is no one knows how to do it. So I think we're still figuring out the methodology, which is what I presented to you folks. I think some of the lessons I'm sure is there for India to move in this direction, but there is a long way to go because governance, as I mentioned, and the cities and how they operate are very different from the way things happen in Canada.
Thank you so much.
Would any other discussant would like to add on to any more points with the rest of us have discussed? Dr. Binoy, Dr. Barsha?
I think in the interest of time, we should try to do it at some other point.
Fine. Okay, sir.
I have a question to Binoy. He is from Kerala. Am I right, Rajiv?
Yes, madam.
Binoy, can I ask you one question?
Yeah, sure.
So Wayanad landslides. So it is very, very sad incident. Could you please explain a bit more why it happened? How can we solve those type of problems in the future?
I think it's a very complicated thing for a social scientist to explain. Probably we should leave it to the experts. But I think I can touch upon it. Wayanad is one of the only aspiring district in the state, and it is also home to a sizable proportion of the indigenous populations in the state. So it's known as a hill district, and with the vast swatches of plantations and undulating terrain in the Western Ghat zone. I think we all know that there has been a substantial change in the rainfall patterns in the state, and we have been receiving torrential rains. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was updating me on what's happening in Wayanad. And with such heavy rains in a small span of time, and probably there are other human factors, and then the limited preparedness we had. It was just a small, I think it's about 3 wards of a local self-government, panchayat we call it here, was impacted, but there were dense residential pockets right below the hills, and then with the torrential rains, and then with the landslip, it swept away the entire, I think, 3 or 4 kilometers or more than that. So it is a combination of climate-related issues plus our human interventions in the Western Ghats region, and perhaps this area was not inhabitable. I think a couple of years ago, I think it was in 2019, a severe landslide occurred just in about 1 kilometer's area, killing a lot of people. So perhaps these are areas which need to be re-examined as whether they are livable. And it appears to me that we need to think about planned relocation for people in many parts of Western Ghats region, not only in Kerala but the entire southern states. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. So, considering the time available, I thank all panelists who have joined today, and Dr. Sandeep also, for sharing your insights on the topic of planning for equity and inclusion for urban justice. So before we take the question, we have one more presentation by our graduate. So I request Siri and Muskan to introduce Mr. Ashwin to the audience, please.
Thank you, sir. I will call on Mr. Ashwin. Mr. Ashwin is a civil engineer and environmental planner. He has done his master's in environmental planning and management from School of Planning and Architecture, Vijayawada. He is currently working with WSP India. To the discussion.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, Ashwin, you're audible.
Okay, thank
Good
you.
evening.
So good evening, everyone, esteemed panel members, faculties, and all the people that were joined online. First of all, thank you so much for inviting and giving me an opportunity to talk here. I'm Ashwint. I'm a grad from School of Planning and Architecture, Vijayawada, and I'm really happy to introduce myself and the topic that I will be presenting today. So the topic for the discussion will be an integrated approach for coastal resilience and climate justice in spatial planning, a case of Thiruvananthapuram Municipal Corporation, Kerala. So before starting, I'll just present my screen. Can anybody confirm that my screen is visible?
Yes, Ashwin, your screen is visible.
Okay, thank you so much. So the topic for the discussion is an integrated approach for coastal resilience and climate justice in spatial planning, a case of Thiruvananthapuram Municipal Corporation, Kerala. So this was my thesis topic, which was guided by Dr. Adinarayan sir. So to move into the topic, we need to understand initially what is climate justice. So climate justice is a moral ethical principle that seeks to address the disproportionate impact of climate change on vulnerable communities and the future generation that is to come. And so to talk about climate justice, we need to initially understand what why does this climate justice topic matter. So to put that into perspective, we can break it down to three questions. That is, first one is what is climate justice, second one is how is climate justice study different from other vulnerability studies, and the third one is what is the focus of the climate justice study. So to answer the first question, that is what is climate justice, the climate justice captures the various ways in which climate change impacts the people differentially, and what are the different approaches which can be taken to address this problem in a fair manner. So the second question would be, how is the climate justice study different from normal vulnerability studies? So this climate justice study investigate the socioeconomic differences among the individuals whose lives are majorly impacted by the climate change that is happening around in the region. So coming on to the third focus, that is the focus of the climate justice studies. So majorly we can divide this focus into four parts. The first one is the causes, the second one is the consequences, the third one is the responses, and the fourth one is the governance part that we'll be talking about. So to break down this element of climate justice, we can break down into two major parts. The first one is climate change. The second one is social justice, wherein climate change covers the topics of adaptation, the impact, and its mitigation. In social justice, it covers the topics of disadvantaged places, the disadvantaged groups, and also the unplanned zones which are in the region.
Ashwint, your presentation, the slide is in presenter mode.
Okay, sorry. I'll present like this. If it's okay.
Yes, this is better, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. So talking about this, integrating this climate justice topic to Indian context, why this climate justice study is important. If you can see that 1/3 of the India's coastline is vulnerable to erosion, impacting the coastal communities which are living in the erosion-prone areas. And what we can see is that in 2020 there was about 0.862 billion people which were in the low elevation coastal zone in the global scenario, and it's supposed to increase to almost 1 billion in the coming decades. And the reason for selecting Thiruvananthapuram Municipal Corporation is that the district by statistics by the Kerala government states that the Thiruvananthapuram district is having the major, its coastline is having 23% of erodible areas or in the high erosion areas. And Thiruvananthapuram is also vying for the title of City of Peace under UNESCO Creative Cities, and under City of Peace, we can actually take justice as a component. And since it's affected by different climatic factors, we can actually say that climate justice can be taken as an important parameter for this. So coming on to the research design, the main question that we why to answer is that to what extent do the coastal communities experience injustice in terms of unequal access to resources and exposure to climate risk, and the second one will be what are the socio-economic and environmental consequences of more frequent and severe coastal events on the vulnerable communities, and the third one will be how can integrated approach to coastal adaptation and mitigation be designed and implemented so that it can address the topic of this climate justice. So coming on to the research design, the main aim of the study was to evolve an integrated climate justice framework for achieving coastal resilience of the study region. So the whole study was divided into 4 objectives. The first one was to define the climate justice for Tirunelveli Municipal Corporation in perspective of physical, socio-economic, and economic aspect in the study region. Since climate justice study around the world majorly has been done, which was very well contextualized. So we need to understand what is climate justice for the study region, that is Tirunelveli Municipal Corporation. The second objective is to assess the physical, socio-economic, and economic components of the climate justice, wherein we'll be assessing the physical hazard of the study region, which includes shoreline change and flood susceptibility. The second one will be to assess the socio-economic vulnerability, and the third one to assess the infrastructure vulnerability of study region, to come up with a risk map to find out areas where in the cooperation itself where is high risk and low risk areas, to define the high risk and low risk areas. And the third objective will be to quantify the impacts of the climate justice on the livelihood of the communities, and to evaluate the current schemes and practices that is currently available in Tirunelveli Municipal Corporation to identify the areas which are devoid of the climate justice. So where it will be dealing with livelihood index, which will be taking 5 capitals, that is a human, natural, physical, financial, and social capital, and also we'll be doing an economic valuation where we'll be taking into account the monetary evaluation of impacts and the monetary assessment of existing practices that is currently in the municipal corporation, to come up with a net loss or gain which is prevalent in the city, and finally come up with a climate justice index for the city. And the fourth one will be
Ashwin, are you there?
analysis. I'm sorry. Am I audible right now?
Yeah, yes. Ashwin, continue.
Okay. So coming on to the analysis, major analysis results and inferences. The first analysis which was done was the shoreline.
Your screen is not visible.
Okay.
Share your screen, please.
I guess it's visible right now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the first analysis which was done was a shoreline change analysis, which was done for 2 decades, from 2003 to 2023, which the results got was like 10 out of the 15 watts in the coastal region are in high erosion susceptible zones, and of lots of studies has been done in the shoreline change, and our study found out that almost 133 hectares of land has been lost in the last 5 years. And the further studies which was done states that from 2004 to 2020 there was a study done on coastal erosion for the Tirunelveli Municipal Corporation, and it stated that almost 650 hectares of major land has been lost from the Tirunelveli Municipal Corporation. The second analysis which was done was flood susceptibility, which the results got was like almost 18 kilometer square of this total municipal corporation area are in the high flood susceptible areas, and total which takes into account almost 10 watts in the total 100 number of watts which are in the study region. So after that, we prepared a multi-hazard susceptibility map which takes into account both the flood susceptibility and the shoreline change, which shows that almost 13 watts in the study region are in high hazarded susceptible zones. So the next analysis was done to find out the social characteristics. So the first one was to find out the socioeconomic vulnerability, which was based on the major indicators of education, minority status, housing, health, and marginal population. So the data was taken from the 2019-20 household survey, which was done in Tirunelveli Municipal Corporation, and almost 30 indicators was used for the study, and shows that 15% of the watts in the study region are in high or very high vulnerability region. And as we can see that the watts which are closer to this coastal side are more vulnerable compared to the other region or the CBD of the region. And coming on to the infrastructure vulnerability, almost 26 indicators were used, which was based on the water availability, energy poverty, transport, health, and essential services. So the infrastructure vulnerability, as we can define, is the percentage of households which have access to all these kinds of infrastructures. So what we can see is that almost 40% of the wards are in either very high or high vulnerability zones, and we have prepared a risk map which combines both the hazard, the multi-hazard map, which takes into account the erosion and the flood, and also this social and infrastructure vulnerability to create a risk map, which shows that almost 18% of the wards are in the high or very high risk zones, in which almost all the wards are in the coastal side of the region, which affects basically the fishermen communities. So the next one, what we did was to find out the livelihood index, taking into 5 capitals, that is a human, financial, natural, physical, and social capital. So what we could find is that out of these 5 capitals, which if we combine the wards which are in the CBD of the region are having, they don't lack much infrastructure as compared to the wards which are in the outskirts of the region, and there is a high lack of natural and social capital in the study region as compared to other capitals which we studied. So the next analysis what we have done is a monetary gain or monetary loss for the study region, where we have combined 2 major monetary valuation, wherein we took the monetary loss, which included loss of infrastructure due to flooding and erosion in the region, loss of land due to erosion, loss of healthcare due to flooding, loss in the livelihood due to flooding. So we converted everything into monetary terms, that is the money that has been lost by the people or the government. And the monetary gain are basically the livelihood through agriculture and fisheries in the region, and the total funding for the against the flooding that has been done, and the monetary value of the coastal protection measures that has been taken for each wards in the study region. So what we could find is that there is a net loss in the study region. So the net loss is basically, if you can see that the darker green region are major net loss. So 40% of the ward are in very high vulnerability as compared to the loss in the study region, and towards the eastern part of the study region there is a very less amount of loss that is happening as compared to the coastal wards. So finally we ended up with a climate justice index map. So this climate justice index map takes into account the net loss and gain, and also the risk that we initially found out, and also the livelihood index. And also we found out a Gini coefficient, where basically it's to give a considerable inequality for study region. So we could find out that the Gini coefficient was around 0.5. So that also indicated that there is a high injustice or inequality that is happening in the region if you compare these 3 factors, that is the loss, monetary loss, the risk, and the livelihood of the region. So coming on to the proposal that we have done, so we have divided the proposal into 3 strategies. The first one was proposal for coastal protection and floods, wherein we found out areas which had to have coastal protection components and the flood protection components. So if you look at the areas, we have delineated different zones based on different their characteristics, and also the bathymetry of the study region, and also the presence of the coral reefs in the study region. So the major coastal protection include the green grain infrastructure, which include the living breakwater and offshore breakwaters, and also some engineering solution, which includes the geotopes, which can be employed in the study region, wherein I guess the Kerala government is also have some policies or programs where they have initiated the geotubes in the coastal region. And coming on to the flood protection measures, we have basically identified zones for the riparian zones, and also some canals which has to be restored in the region has also been identified. And coming on to the second proposal, that is the blue economy and the sustainable livelihood. The main aim of this proposal is to improve the financial and social capital of study region, and also to diversify the livelihood of the communities with the climate change. So say for example, if you are taking the artificial reefs, which CMFRI has already employed in India, so there has been areas where the artificial reefs can be employed. So we have identified the areas wherein artificial reefs can be employed, and also some new smart shrimp technologies which can be employed in the mangrove region of the study region. So these are some of the proposals that we have proposed. So coming on to the third proposal, that is a framework. So the framework, which include the collection of, or the culmination of all the study that we have done. So the major 4 agents, which were community, the ecosystem, resources, and technology, which depends on the main capital, the majorly 5 capitals, that is the natural, physical, human, social, and financial capital, which get affected by the vulnerability and the risk of the study region. So there should be a structural mechanism of collaborative governments in the study region. Say for example, we can introduce climate financing, which has components of measurement, report, and verification. Also, there can be instances of participatory budgeting, which can be done for the region, wherein participatory meeting in ward level or zonal level can be taken into account, and that can be taken into annual budget wheel. So the annual budget wheel, what you can see is that modification of the annual budget wheel, what we have done, wherein the budget instruction starts in this region, that is October to November, and participating meetings should come to know the needs of the people or the needs of the minority in the study region, and an MRV mechanism should be done, and also the progress check also should be done to extend into the next year. So which focuses on the major responsibility of the people. So there might be three major teams that needs to be there in the cooperation. That's the finance team, the climate action plan team, and all the other teams which can actually collaborate with each other for the major thrust areas in the climate justice study, that is the causes, consequences, responses, and governance, which can give us the major 6 climate justice action plans, which are to integrate climate justice into planning and policy, to conduct meaningful and inclusive engagement, to partner and collaborate with the people, to ensure access to basic goods and services, to embed climate justice and build capacity and internally, to raise awareness and amplify, so that there is a system that has been done in the city to address this justice in a fair manner. So that's it from me. Thank you so much. So if you have
So thank you very much, Ashwin. I know that we had told you 7:30, now it's 8:40. So thank you very much for introducing your work, which you've done as part of your project of masters on urban justice and integrating urban justice and climate concerns into planning, and how spatially we can interpret and study equity also. So thank you for the same. And because we are running too short of time, there are some questions which I've got from the students, but I think we can take up at a later platform. So bringing me to the concluding remarks and proposing a quick vote of thanks. So good evening to all. I know it's pretty late. So distinguished guests, eminent speakers, and panelists for today's discussion, esteemed colleagues who have joined us online, participants from all the local self-governments in Kerala who are also a patient audience, my dear students who have joined us, and all future planners. As we come close to this insightful and thought-provoking session of the Kerala Urban Dialogue, I'm very honored to present these remarks and to extend my heartfelt thanks to everyone who has made this at this stage a success. So reflecting on the dialogue that we've had over the past 2 hours, we've delved into pressing issues surrounding planning for equity and inclusion for urban justice in Kerala. The conversations that we've had today was not just about diagnosing the challenges that urban Kerala faces, but also what we've seen is it's more of envisioning the solutions that, like for example, like inclusionary zoning or context-specific flexible bylaws that we can have, migrant inclusive urban governance that we can incorporate, or how spatial planning can include equity as a spatial component, not just as a quantitative component. All this can help transform our cities into more equitable, inclusive, and just spaces for all. Means our speakers, through our speakers, we've explored the facets of urban justice, from the necessity of inclusive urban planning that truly reflects the diversity of our communities to the imperative of addressing very systemic inequalities that perpetuate the marginalization of the vulnerable groups. If I just quickly just sum up in 1 minute on the key takeaways that have emerged from today's dialogue, we were introduced to the importance of inclusivity in planning, especially the spatial aspects of it, addressing specific systemic inequities of tackling urban inequities, which requires multifaceted and holistic approach, community-centric solutions, like what Dr. Barsha was introducing, collaborative governance, or inclusive urban governance, what Dr. Binoy was highlighting, etc. So as we move forward, it is imperative that all these insights and strategies we've discussed today are translated into action also. So I believe that while framing the new Kerala urban policy, we can consider incorporating these learnings, ensuring that equity and inclusion are not just aspirations, but the integral components of urban development across the state of Kerala. So with that, I conclude and I propose a vote of thanks. I extend my heartfelt thanks to all team from Kerala Institute of Local Administration, including Dr. Ajit, Miss Irene, and many more who has been integral in constructing this thought of Kerala Urban Dialogue under the able leadership of the current Director General Sri Nizamuddin Sir IAS and the earlier Director General of Dr. Joy Ilaman, whom we've initiated this with. We are very thankful that your meticulous planning and hard work, which you have extended to SP Vijayawada team of comprising of Adnaran sir and myself, and we have more faculty, have ensured that this event was at least we were able to complete it as a whole. A special thanks to all our eminent speakers and panelists, Professor Dr. Sandeep Agarwal, who joined us from Canada, Dr. Barsha from India, Professor Shashwat Bandhopadhyay from Ahmedabad, where Sir was already facing a problem, but Sir managed to join. Dr. Binoy Peter from Kerala. We have Dr. Kumali from UK, all who have shared their invaluable knowledge and insights with us today. Your contributions definitely have, I am sure, that has sparked meaningful discussions and undoubtedly inspired new ideas. I also would like to acknowledge all the participants, academics, practitioners, community leaders, and students. So students from SP Vijayawada, majority of them have engaged onto a field visit. So the rest of them, they were eager to participate. So we've gathered them in one studio and they were eagerly listening. They have a lot of interesting questions, which probably maybe at a later stage we will address. I would like to thank the technical and the support staff behind the scenes, our IT team at SP Vijayawada, specifically our comparers, Miss Siri and Muskan, who were running around to manage when the audio problem was we were faced with. Our staff from Department of Planning also. All your efforts have allowed us to conduct this event smoothly and seamlessly, whether in person or virtually. Lastly, but not the least, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to our Director, Professor Dr. Ramesh Srikonda, sir, and Dr. Adnaran, being the two pillars of support at SP Vijayawada for conduct of this KUD session. So with that, thank you very much and have a pleasant evening. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rajiv. Thank you, Professor Sandeep Agarwal, for accepting our invitation and sparing your valuable time. Thank you so much, sir. We will collaborate in future. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Irene.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Irene.
Irene.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, students.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, sir. Siri, I think you can log out from there.